So the Lord of Hatred expansion for Diablo 4 is legitimately going to be giving us Diablo 4 2.0. There's just so much massive overhauls coming with it, so much massive new additions coming, a complete overhaul to the end game, pretty much a complete overhaul to how gear works, how crafting works in terms of item modification, and actually just crafting gear or different items. So all of that is going to be just absolutely massive, but one of the biggest and most exciting changes coming with the expansion is the skill tree overhaul. And over the past couple weeks or past month, or more specifically since the expansion has been revealed, we've been getting a little bit of information here and there that gives us a bit more of a glimpse into what we can expect with not only the skill tree overhauls, but how those are going to affect the classes themselves. Because not only are we seemingly getting big skill tree overhauls to every class, but it seems that the unique class mechanics are also probably going to get massive overhauls too, because two of the classes we've gotten some pretty big things revealed that I think indicates their unique class mechanics are getting completely changed. Now, just a small refresher of what the skill tree overhaul is going to entail. So first off, no more passives in the skill trees. Every single passive has been removed. Now it's only going to be our skills and their skill upgrades that have also been pretty heavily changed. So every single skill is going to have the same amount of upgrade options and variants, including your ultimate skills. And then every skill can also be upgraded up to 12 times. So right now we can only put 5 points in a skill. In the expansion, it's seeming like it will be 12. So some pretty massive changes just there, but the upgrades to all the skills is where it gets really interesting. So instead of getting a skill, having the 1 point you put into an upgrade that wasn't a choice, and then one of two options, pretty much all of which are just like passive upgrades to the skills, now that has been completely changed and we have three different paths to go down. We have two side paths that both give one of two options. These are circular, pointing at these primarily being passive upgrades. So you'd go down the left path, you would choose one out of two more passive upgrades to the skill. Then you go down the right path, one of two more passive upgrades. And then you would finally go down the middle path that will give you seemingly 3 to 4 different options of variants to the skill. And these variants are significantly bigger than any other skill change we've had in the game thus far. You'll be able to do things like completely change how a skill works. You'll be able to completely change the element of a skill. We've been able to see the entirety of the Warlock skill tree. So we've seen some of their ultimates completely change how the skill works. Like for instance, one of their ultimates, you could just turn it into not an ultimate skill anymore. It won't have a cooldown anymore. Or some of the other skills you could turn into a much longer cooldown ability to give other effects. One of their big summon ultimates, instead of just like this big thing that pops out and swings at things, it now follows you around. So you will have pretty massive changes to how the skills work, their elements, and pretty much completely changing the playstyle of that one skill just by those skill variants that you get to choose between. But then, like I mentioned, we got some further information on specifically the Druid and the Necromancer, because we got a little bit of a look at the Necromancer skill tree, and we got some further information on the Druid and how some of their skills will work. For the Necromancer, one of the really big things you could see in the skill tree is that their summons are now just in the skill tree, which if you've ever played a Necromancer, their summons are primarily in their Book of the Dead, which is their unique class mechanic. They get their summons in there, and then they choose some upgrades for those summons that can change specifically what those summons are or the different things they do within their Book of the Dead. But now in Lord of Hatred, their summons are in their skill trees, meaning they have the same upgrade options as all the other skills. So they have the two side paths, and then they have the variants in the middle that can completely change up how those summons will work and probably change up their elements as well, like all the other skills for all of the other classes. So at a baseline, the Book of the Dead for the Necromancer is going to be completely changed, and we have no idea what that's gonna be yet. Presumably it's still going to be primarily focused on buffing up your summons, and I would be very surprised if they don't still have some replacement for the sacrifice mechanic. If you've never played a Necromancer, you could either choose upgrades for your different Druid summons, or you could choose a sacrifice where you can no longer use that summon, but it just gives you a big buff or some other effect to be a more caster version of a Necromancer. So with all the summons and all their upgrades and things like that being just in the skill tree, the Book of the Dead is going to be completely reworked into something different. My presumption is they're trying to make it more like our newer classes, specifically the Spiritborn, the Warlock, and the Paladin, because their unique class mechanics are significantly more interesting for just creating different builds and having a lot more customization for your playstyle and your class. So they're probably going to be doing that with the Book of the Dead, and that is pretty exciting. They're probably also going to try to make it so you can have just a full massive army of summons for more summon focused builds. So we're starting to get shown that the older classes, or more specifically the launch classes, are probably going to be getting bigger changes than the newer classes will be getting, because specifically I think the unique class mechanic for most of the launch classes are kind of outdated. And then in our most recent developer live stream, where they showed off the Warlock, and they also talked about the most recent season, where they also had a developer Q&A at the end where people could just ask any questions, they were asked about some of the big changes coming with the expansion, and one of the developers gave the information specifically for the Druid that you will essentially be able to choose what form you want your skills to use, instead of being like it is right now on a Druid, where every skill is essentially just one form. You can't really change it except for a few different options, more specifically a few different options with legendary aspects that allows like one skill to now be a skill for a different form, but that's only for a couple skills, and they're usually more utility things. It's almost none of like the main skills you would focus a build around. You can actually change what forms those are focusing on, and it sounds like every or most of the abilities come Lord of Hatred, you will just be able to choose what form you want to use. They gave the example of like Maw, which is a bear basic skill that can only be used in bear. You can't change this in any way right now. You could just choose to do that in werewolf. And it also sounds like there will be ways to also choose to be human for a good chunk of these skills. That one I'm assuming will be much less prominent than being able to choose between werewolf or werebear, because more than likely only specific more caster focused things will be able to be used primarily as a human. Now they didn't specify how these choices would be made. There is the possibility that in like every skill in one of the side path upgrades that give you more passives, you'd be able to choose between being like a werewolf and werebear, but I think that's much less likely, because that would pretty much be the side passive upgrades for most of the skills for the Druid being taken up by choosing the form you're in. Now, they could also give upgrades in those. You would never be choosing for the upgrade. You would always be choosing for what form you would be in. So more than likely, how I think this is going to play out is the form choosing will primarily not be in the skill tree. It will probably be the reworked version of our spirit boons for the Druid, because right now the unique class mechanic for the Druid are spirit boons, and they're essentially all passive upgrades. Most of them are the equivalent of like a passive you could find in any skill tree for any of the classes right now, just some passive stat increase. A couple of them are a bit more interesting, like resetting the cooldowns of certain skills, or like a lucky hit to reduce your ultimate, but most of them, even that last one I just mentioned, are essentially the equivalent of passives in our current skill trees, and more than likely they are completely reworking the spirit boons for the Druid. And what I think is most likely to happen is the spirit boons are going to be where you choose what form you want to use for skills. Now, I don't exactly know how you would do this for every specific skill. There could be a mix of some of the options are in the skill tree, and there are some more overarching option in the spirit boons, or you may just be able to choose, like, I want to be a werewolf, and it'll give me some buffs for werewolf, and then maybe any of the skills I want to use, I can just be werewolf in them. So there may be that option. That would be kind of crazy, where they just completely redo the spirit boons, and you just get to choose if you want your skills to be all in werebear, werewolf, or human. That could be crazy. I'm sure it's not going to be as one-dimensional as that, but my presumption is that a lot of the options of choosing what form you're in for all of your specific skills is probably going to start with your unique class mechanic of the spirit boons. And I think this is just more information that the unique class mechanic for all of the launch classes are probably going to be changed pretty heavily. They're probably going to keep the same theming and same flavor that they currently have, but they are probably going to be heavily changed to be much more reminiscent of, again, our 3 most recent classes, where their unique class mechanics are significantly more gameplay impacting than all of the launch classes. Because realistically, if you look at the unique class mechanics for all of the launch classes, they are all primarily like stat or power increases. They give some a bit more impactful effects in some of them. Most of them are just stat increases or small new effect increases that, again, are pretty reminiscent of passives you could find in the current skill trees. And I think they are very much going to change them to be much more like the 3 most recent classes, because when you look at the 3 most recent classes, all of their unique class mechanics are significantly more similar to each other than the launch classes are. And the newest ones are all pretty heavily focused on just completely changing up how things work to just give you a lot more build options. And I really think that's what they're going to be doing with all of the original classes in the Lord of Hatred. So I'm super excited for that. I think Druid is probably going to be a dark horse in how cool it's actually going to be in the expansion. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.